Excellent. So, as I said just a moment ago, this is the Top Tips for C2 Proficiency webinar. And my name is Charles Stewart, and I do work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And I will be delivering the session today for the C2 Proficiency exam. So, with that being said, why is this session so important? Basically, we understand that you have a lot of questions as to how you can better prepare for one of the Cambridge English qualifications exam here, the C2 proficiency exam. So this webinar is designed to help you understand what you need to do between now and exam day. And we're confident that in your regular classes, your teachers have prepared you very well. And we're just here to reinforce what they have already taught you and what you have already learned. And following this session, my hope is that you will leave this session today with a very clear understanding of various practical tips and strategies that you can use both when studying for the exam and also on exam day itself. Therefore, in this session, firstly, we will look at the C2 proficiency exam and we will look at both why it's important, what it is, and some basic facts about taking the C2 proficiency exam. Before then, we begin to look at all four papers or all four parts of the C2 proficiency exam, the reading, writing, listening, and speaking papers. And in doing so, we will be looking at top tips both in taking each part of the exam, but also at the end of the session today, we will look at a few tips for how to better study for the exam and what to expect on exam day itself. And then lastly, at the end of the session, I will give you some links to several resources that we have at Cambridge have prepared for you in looking at taking the C2 proficiency exam. So, my first question that I have for you today, and let me hear from you in the chat. There are many reasons why people take Cambridge English qualifications. Let me hear from you. Why do you want to take the C2 proficiency exam? Let me hear from you in the chat. What is your reasons for taking this particular exam? Okay, academic purposes, to be able to get into a good university. Apply for a master's degree, absolutely. Universities globally look for specific levels of English, and in having a C2 certificate in taking the C2 proficiency, then absolutely you will be looked at very favorably by them. For my future CV, definitely opens doors, absolutely. Academic purposes for living abroad, that's a very good reason for wanting to take it, to find a better job. There are many different reasons that candidates have in taking the C2 proficiency exam. In taking this exam and receiving the C2 certificate, you are able to demonstrate that you have mastered English at an exceptionally high level, at the highest level possible. And in obtaining this certificate, it is internationally recognized by thousands of both universities, institutions, schools, and jobs, businesses globally. And in doing this, it allows you to study abroad and allows you to work in international organizations very freely in the English language. As far as the exam itself, I have some questions that I would like to ask you about the exam to test your knowledge of how much that you know about the C2 proficiency exam. So in the chat, the first question, what are the papers of the C2 proficiency exam? What are the different papers or parts of the C2 proficiency exam? Okay, reading, yes. Speaking, use of English, yes. Reading and use of English, writing, listening, speaking, definitely. So here for the C2 proficiency exam, there is, of course, reading and use of English, lasts around 90 minutes, writing around 90 minutes, listening about 40 minutes. For the listening paper, it's a bit different than the other parts of the exam in that the listening test itself takes around 35 minutes, and then you'll have 5 minutes at the end to transfer your answers to the answer page. We'll talk about this more a little bit later in the session today. And the fourth paper, of course, is the speaking exam. And this lasts around 16 minutes, depending on a few factors, but typically around 16 minutes for the speaking paper. How can you take the exam? So we know that, for example, you can go to an exam center and sit down an actual physical test and take the paper version of the test. Are there any other editions or versions of the test? Digital, versatile, virtual, online? Yes. So with this, we need to be very careful in how we view the other version of the test. There is the standard paper-based version. This is where you go to the exam center, you sit down with a piece of paper, and you take the test. But we also have a digital version of the C2 proficiency exam. I hesitate to call it online because you do not have online access on the computer. But basically, for the digital test, this is done on a laptop or a computer. So you will go to an exam center. They have computers that you will use, and you will take the exam itself digitally for all four papers. Is the digital exam for all four papers? Reading and use of English, writing, listening, and speaking? Exactly. In the chat, someone got it correct. Reading and use of English, writing and listening are all done digitally. However, the speaking paper is still done face to face. This is not done digitally. Cambridge decided to make this decision because being face to face with people lends itself more naturally to speaking. Therefore, two different ways to take the exam. Now, we're going to watch just a very quick 1 minute video on the digital exam. There are a lot of different advantages and features that this exam has. So let's watch this exam or watch this video.
Our digital exams are the fast and flexible way to get a trusted Cambridge English qualification. Available from A2 Key to C2 Proficiency, the user-friendly features help you perform at your best. So, what are the benefits of Cambridge English Qualifications Digital? They're fast. Results will be ready in 5 to 10 working days. They're flexible. Exam sessions are available up to 365 days a year. And they're preferred. Digital features help you focus and put you in control.
I'm very excited to get my results back sooner. Otherwise, I have to wait for such a long time, and now I can get it before my summer break.
For the listening test, headphones with volume control help you concentrate. The writing test has an automatic word count, and you can easily edit your work.
Instead of worrying about the number of words you're writing, they can just focus on the composition itself.
In the reading test, you can make notes, highlight text, and review your answers.
I like the fact that you could pick and drag some answers and put it in the paragraph, something that you obviously don't do in a paper-based exam.
The speaking test is face-to-face to help develop real-world communication skills. Our digital exams have simple navigation and an on-screen timer to help you stay on track.
The timer is essential for our students because they like to be in control. They want to know how much time they have left for their exam.
Everything has been designed to give you the best chance of success. Visit our website to find an exam centre and lots of resources to help you get ready. Cambridge English Qualifications Digital, the preferred exam experience.
So we can see here the digital exam. There are really a lot of benefits in taking the exam digitally rather than the traditional paper-based exam. A common question that is often asked is, are these exams available everywhere? Most places, yes. However, I will refer you to your teacher or your exam center, and they should be able to give you more information on it. I know we do work with exam centers for digital exams in Greece, in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Romania, in a lot, if not most of the countries in Central and Eastern and Southern Europe as well. So to find their availabilities, do speak to your teacher and your exam center, and they can definitely give you more information on this. So, the next question that I have, when do you get your results? How long does it take for the results to come back? Okay, a few months, 2 months. Let me hear from you in the chat. What do you think? Couple of months, about 60 days, 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, so the time varies depending on the version of the exam that you take. If you take the paper-based exam, typically it's 4 to 6 weeks. So between a month to a month and a half. However, you can see here the digital results are available in around a week, 5 to 10 days. So there's definitely a huge advantage in this to taking the digital exams. Also, a very common question that is asked here is, why is it so different between the exams? Well, with the paper-based exams, they are sent and by post back to Cambridge for marking, whereas the digital exams are digitally transmitted to Cambridge. Therefore, with the time differences and things in the post, the postage system, this accounts usually for the differences between the two forms of the exams, either the paper-based or the digital. Okay, last question that I have for you. You get your results. What will your results say? So your grades that you passed, okay. XXX out of 230, okay. Whether you passed, if you failed, A, B, C, D. So if we look here on the screen, this is an example of the C2 Proficiency Certificate. We can see here A, B, C. As long as you get above a certain threshold, you will get the C2 certificate. However, if your grade is below this, usually, most of the time, you will get a C1 certificate, unless you really do not do well on the exam, which that rarely happens. So if you notice here, it will say your grades as well as your exact score as well. And then at the bottom, it has some explanation as to the points and what they mean. If you would like to see these again at the end of the session today, I will give you a link to the Cambridge website for the C2 Proficiency exam. Have a look there at some of the resources, and it will explain this in detail as to how they're scored and the numbers and how they arrive at those numbers as well. So now that we've looked at the overall exam structure, let's now focus on all four of the parts of the C2 Proficiency exam. And in doing this, we will look at the more challenging sections of each of these papers that candidates tend to struggle with a bit more. So, first of all, beginning with reading and use of English, you can see here there are 7 parts to the reading and use of English paper. In the chat, which part do you find most difficult? Let me hear from you in the chat. Okay, parts 5, part 6, 5, 6, and 7. So the reading portions. Part 4, a lot of part 4s are coming up. Okay, so here, typically, the parts that candidates find the most challenging are parts 3, which is word transformations. 4, keyword transformations, or sometimes they're called sentence transformations. And then part 6, one of the reading texts. So, what I would like for us to do now is to look at each of these 3 parts and to establish exactly what needs to be done and how we can go about doing that. So, first of all, part 3, we can see here there are words that you are given, and this is the root word. And from this, you somehow need to add, take away, change the word form somehow. So we can see here the word is effect. Power napping is an effective. So you can see here that the word itself stays the same, but additions are added. Okay, now, how do we do this portion of the exam? The first recommendation that I will give you is very quickly to read through the text to get an overall understanding of what it is about. It's very important for this part of the exam that you look at the context in order to determine the actual word form that is the answer. Remember, you do need to somehow change the words that are given. It might be you changing it into a negative or into a plural form. Make sure, though, that with the gap that you look both before and after the gap to fully determine the context that will tell you the form of the word. And this is very important because sometimes at the end of the sentence, one or two of the words would indicate that it needs to be the negative form, or just before a determiner may be used that would indicate it needs to be in the plural form. So make sure to look at the context. And then, if you don't know what the word could be, brainstorm. Try to write in 20 seconds, 30 seconds or so, try to write as many words as you can, forms of the word that is given. So, for example, effect, effective, effectiveness. Try to brainstorm as many as you can in order to determine which one should go in the gap. With your level of English, usually you will either be able to determine the word, or in brainstorming, you will be able to identify which word should fit in the gap. Now, here, a very common question that is asked: are words like doesn't and isn't, so contractions, are they counted as one word or two? Let me hear from you in the chat. I see a very mixed bag, a few more twos than ones. So this is extremely important to understand. Contractions like doesn't or isn't are always counted as two words. Therefore, in this portion of the exam, it will not be doesn't or isn't because you're looking for one word. Now, there is one exception though. Does anyone know what the exception is? Exactly, cannot. Can't or cannot is only counted as one word. Every other contraction, though, is counted as two words. So do keep that in mind. So if we look at the next sentence here after the example that was given, the word is alert that we're looking at in the gap for number 17. So if I brainstorm some words, I can think of alerted, alertly, alertness, unalert. Have a read of this sentence. Which one of these words is the correct answer to number 17? Let me hear from you in the chat. And already everyone is getting it well done. So here, which dramatically improves alertness. So here, remember though, after you think you know the answer, read the sentence with the word in it, just like I did, just simply to double check, to make sure that it does make sense. Okay, so 17 is alertness. What about number 18? Okay, I see executives, execution. It is executives, exactly. Now, keep in mind that the word that is given will always be in the answer on the same line. One mistake that candidates sometimes make is they will try to put a word form of maximum here, but no, maximum stays on the same line as number 19. So it's always the same line. Okay, what about number 19 with maximum? What is the correct form of the word? Exactly. So here, maximize. Notice though there are two possible spellings. One is the British spelling, one is the American spelling. Does it matter which one you use? Exactly. No, it does not. But there is something very important that you need to remember, especially for the C2 proficiency exam. British English, American English, both are okay, but if you start in British English, you need to continue using British English. If you begin in American English, you need to consistently use American English throughout the exam, or else your score will reflect it. At your level, you should be able to stick to one or the other for things like spellings or phrases or sayings, things like this. So do keep that in mind. Okay, moving right along to part four, everyone's favorite portion of the reading and use of English exam. So for part four, we can see here that we're given a sentence, and then here we're given another sentence with a gap in it. What you need to do is using this word, fill in the gap using the word and other words, 3 to 8 in total, and both of these sentences must have the same meaning. So we can see here, do you mind if I watch you while you paint? Objection. Do you have any objection to my watching you while you paint? So with this portion of the exam, the first tip that I will give you is read the first sentence very carefully to make sure that you understand exactly what it means. After you've done this, the next step, identify the parts in sentence one and sentence two that are the same. Mark those out because you know that the answer will not be anything that is the same. The answer will always lie in what is missing in the second sentence. And then, of course, using the information about what is missing and the provided word, try to determine your answer. But do not write the full sentence on the answer sheet. Only the answer itself goes on the answer sheet, and it will always be between 3 and 8 words. Okay, a very common question that is asked here. What happens if I make one small mistake in part four? Do I get 0 points? Okay, no, no, two, you lose one, half point. Okay, so for part four, of the reading and use of English. Each answer is worth 2 points. And what they do, they divide the answer in half. If you get the first part correct, you get a point. And if you get the second part correct, you get a point. If you mess up on the first part, but you still get the second part correct, you get 1 point. And then, of course, if you get neither side correct, you get 0 points. So it's not half points, it's actual points, but each answer is worth 2 in total. So do keep that in mind for part 4. So let's look at this sentence. It's impossible to predict how long it will take to do this job. Telling, there is blank will take. So we've read it. Now the second step is establishing exactly what is the same. Will take, will take. Okay, so to do this job is after will take in this sentence, but it needs to go before it in the second sentence. Telling. Telling can be used with there is to mean impossible if we use no. Therefore, my thought is there's no telling how long this job will take. Is that correct or no in the chat? It is indeed correct. There is no telling how long this job. This would be the answer that you will write on the answer sheet. Okay, your turn. Let me hear from you in the chat. What is the answer to this? Remember, 3 to 8 words. Okay, I see several different answers coming through in the chat. So let's look at this sentence. So, step 1, read it. Not many people buy that particular product these days. Step 2, mark out what is the same. That particular product these days. So, we need to focus our attention here on not many people buy. So, my first thought, there are no people buying that particular product these days. Well, it doesn't use demand. Buy and product are all connect with the idea of commerce. In demand is also connected with commerce. So there is no demand for that particular product these days. Okay. My third thought, there is not a lot of demand for that particular product these days. 1, 2, or 3. Which of these thoughts is the correct one? It is number 3. Pay attention. Not many people indicate that no, it's not no demand because there's a little bit of demand. Therefore, make sure to read carefully what is not marked out to make sure that the second sentence exactly means the same thing as the first. So if basically for this, someone just asked in the chat, and I'll go ahead and answer this now. This is the exact answer that they're looking for. There is low demand. No, there is not a lot of demand. There's always one exact answer that they're looking for, and it will always be clear in the sentence itself. Occasionally, you will have an answer where there are two possibilities, and they have both of those possibilities that you will get credit for if you put one or the other. But usually, there's one answer that is correct for this. Okay, moving right along to part 6. Part 6 is a bit challenging because you're trying to do a few different things here. You're trying to read the text, but we can see here that there are parts missing of the text. So what you need to do is A through H, you need to fill in the gap with the missing paragraph. How do we do this part of the exam? First of all, as with everything, make sure to read carefully. Make sure that you understand the main idea in each paragraph. Now, usually with the reading texts, you can use skimming, you can use scanning, absolutely you can. However, with part six, you do need to read a little bit more in detail in order to understand what the answer is. So, first of all, read the text carefully. Make sure that you keep an overall idea of the development of the text as it goes along, and make sure that the extracts that are chosen for each gap fit with what comes before and what comes after it. Because remember, when the correct answers are in the correct place, it reads as one continuous text that develops and progresses. A big tip that I will give you for part six involves your pen. Read with your pen. Make sure that as you're reading through the text, you're underlining things, you're circling things, you're writing notes on the test paper. If you do the digital exam, you still can read with your cursor and you're able to highlight things. You're able to write notes as well. So all of the same techniques can be used no matter the paper-based or the digital exam. Here, a very common question that is often asked, what if I don't understand all of the words? On the C2 Proficiency exam, it is designed in such a way that there will be an occasional word that you will not know. However, do not panic. Usually, if you see a word that you do not know, if you look at the context, what comes before, what comes after it, it will give you an idea as to what the word can be. The word 99.9% of the time, the answer will not depend on you understanding the one word. Don't get caught up on the one word that you don't understand, and in doing so, panic and forget about the other 150 words that you do understand. So if we look at this here, this paragraph, I'll give you about 30 seconds or so. Just quickly scan through the paragraph here to get an idea of what it is about. Okay, so as I'm reading through this, I'm making notes. So here, Spanish sailors, I would underline this, discovered the Guanche people. Guanche have developed agriculture with little water. Water comes from one tree. Canaries in Sahara Desert, very similar but different because of ocean fog. Okay, now 30 seconds and scan through this last paragraph. Okay, so once again, reading with my pen, making notes. I would underline and make notes. Okay, trees cut down over last century. Agriculture went down. David Reibold wants to change this by creating artificial fog to bring back the cloud forests. Perhaps a, the cloud forest would be a link between the two, maybe. Okay, so then we have these three answers here. So take about 45 seconds and very quickly read through these answers. Okay, so we can see here the topic positive results from something talks about seedling in a net, possibly linking to David, results maybe links to a test, sites, something like this. C, the topic underground tunnels, I would underline that drain into certain areas, gives the impressions that these are not present anymore, but could be brought back to help by reinstating the cloud forest. So possible link maybe the cloud forest. And then here, introduce cloud forests, trees that helped trap moisture. Forests have been destroyed, though. Some parts of the island have gone, but Lanzarote does not. Potential links, cloud forest, Lanzarote, moisture. Okay, so now let's bring the two together. So this is the first paragraph, this is the second paragraph. Which one of these three do you think fits between them? B, C, or D? Okay, I see mostly C's, mostly D's, a few C's. So here, the answer would be indeed D. Make sure that everything that's mentioned in the paragraph flows nicely and correctly from one paragraph to the next paragraph. So even though here cloud forest was mentioned, in this paragraph, Lanzarote was also mentioned as well as moisture. Therefore, it would be logical to introduce cloud forests before then having a paragraph about David Reibold wanting to change the trees being cut down by creating artificial fog to bring back the cloud forests. So, what if you're taking part six and you're not sure? You just simply don't know what the answer is. What do you do then? Okay, move on, guess, go to the next one, make a guess, don't leave it blank, gamble, guess, move on to the next. So, for every part of the exam, never, ever, 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 ever leave anything blank. Guess. So here, if I'm reading through this and I'm not sure, well, it could be B, it could be C, I don't know. Go ahead and write down B, comma C question mark beside of the number on the test paper. And then keep on going. Once you finish part six, go back. If you have used B elsewhere, you know it's C. If you still don't know, is it B or C? Guess. Okay, C, and go ahead and write it down. Always put an answer down, no matter if you do not know whether or not it is correct, simply because if I'm working A, B, C, D, what is the correct answer? And I leave it blank, there's a 0% chance that I will get the answer correct. However, if I guess, okay, A, I have a 25% chance of getting it correct. Therefore, 25% are much better odds than zero. Therefore, never leave anything blank on the C2 proficiency exam. So we've looked at the reading and use of English portion of the exam. Now let's focus on writing, on the writing paper. So for the writing paper, we have part one, which is writing an essay. We have part two, three questions, and you choose one: article, informal letter, formal letter, report, review. Which of these parts do you find most problematic? Okay, so I see a mixed bag, but I will say there are more part ones than part twos. And that actually goes with the trend. Typically, candidates find part one a bit more challenging. So when we look at the writing paper itself, the one important thing to keep in mind throughout the writing portion of the C2 proficiency is how are they going to mark or score your writings? There are four different areas that they look at: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. So, what are each of these? Content. Basically, content is just simply, did you answer the question fully? If they asked you to write an essay and discuss both of the texts, did you write an essay and discuss both of the texts? If in part two they ask you, and well, one of the choices that you get and you choose to do, they ask you to write a report. Did you write a report and include all of the information that they have required? Content is a really good way where you can kind of pad your score a little bit. Because keep in mind, if you do better in content and lower in language, the two will kind of balance each other out. There are 5 points possible in each of these four sections. Therefore, make sure with the content that you are doing exactly what the question requires you to do and doing it fully. With communicative achievement, they say, right, so if the candidate is writing a magazine article, does the piece of writing follow the standard format of a magazine article? Is there a title? Are there sections? For an essay, is there an introduction? Is there a conclusion? Are there topic sentences? But along with that, we need to keep in mind that they also look at register. So, for example, in the chat, an essay, is it formal or informal? Absolutely. So, an essay is formal. So, what should we avoid using in formal English? What should we avoid using in formal English? Contractions, absolutely. Collocations, yes. So a lot of times I have seen on the exam and also with my own students in the past, as I was preparing them for Cambridge exams, they would have the most perfectly constructed essay, but they want to show off their English a bit. And so they randomly throw in the phrase, it's not my cup of tea. It's good that you know that. However, it's not my cup of tea is an idiom, and idioms are informal, and I'm asking you to write formally. Therefore, you think it will boost your score, and it actually does the opposite. Make sure that you keep the right register, especially at the C2 level. You should be able to keep the right register maintained throughout the entire piece of writing. Thirdly, organization. Here they look at how the writing is put together. Is it logical? Did you use linking phrases? Is the essay fluid? Does it flow nicely? Is it logical? And then finally, with language, they look at range of language for both vocabulary and for grammar. So for range of language, what this means is at the C2 level, you should not only be able to use C2 vocabulary and grammar correctly, but you should also be able to use C1, B2, B1, A2, and A1 as well. Therefore, you should have all of these levels that are demonstrated in your piece of writing. And in doing so, are there any mistakes that are repeated or mistakes that make it difficult to understand as the reader? If you make an occasional mistake, it will not affect your score much, if at all. However, if that mistake is repeated again and again and again, It demonstrates that you do not understand this piece of grammar or this particular vocabulary set. Therefore, at the C2 level, you should. Make sure with this, something that just popped up in the chat. For titles, should we add a title in part one? No, because essays typically do not have titles. However, in part two, with some of the different types of writings, you do need a title. Therefore, do keep that in mind. So if we look at part one, in part one, there are two texts. Each text is around 100 words. And they want you to write an essay summarizing and evaluating the key points from both of the texts, using your own words and your own ideas, and writing 240 to 280 words. Okay, how important is it for you to keep to this word count? I would say it's very important for you to keep to this word count. If you have fewer words, because you have fewer words, it will not affect your score as such. But if you have less than 240 words, you are more than likely not adequately explaining and summarizing and evaluating both texts because you do need at least 240 words to do this. But if you go over 280 words, be careful with this as well, because you're more likely to repeat yourself, which will have a negative effect on your score. You're also more likely to make mistakes as well. Therefore, be very mindful in part one, 240 to 280 words. Someone just put an interesting question about dyslexia in the chat. If you could please put that in the Q&A for me, it's at the top of the screen. Put this question in the Q&A, and I will definitely come back to that and speak of that a little bit in detail in the Q&A part of the webinar. So some tips for writing part one. Make sure that you understand exactly what you're supposed to do. Therefore, read the instructions. Even if you have practiced this a million times before the exam, you're going to be a bit nervous on exam day. Therefore, make sure to read it carefully. As you're reading through both of the texts, make sure that you identify the main points before you start writing. Make notes as well and write your own thoughts down on both of them because planning your writing is essential. So, if we look at writing itself, the biggest bit of advice that I will give you is remember power. Prepare, organize, write, edit, and revise. You have roughly 45 minutes per text. So 90 minutes, you need to write two pieces of writing, therefore 45 minutes for each text. So all of these steps you need to go through in that 45 minutes. With prepare, you go through, read with your pen the two texts, underline, circle, make notes. Make sure that you have a good understanding of the texts themselves. Before then, you begin to organize your thoughts. Make sure if you want to write it out, just make a few notes, it's fine. If you want to draw a spider diagram or a concept map, that's fine as well. Keep in mind for every part of the exam, you can use the exam paper itself as your personal notepad because the answers will always go on the answer sheet. If you, at the end of the exam, whether or not you write on the exam paper itself, they will still take those exam papers and just simply destroy them. They will not look or mark anything that is on the exam paper itself. Therefore, make notes on the exam paper, use it to your benefit. You will also be provided with scrap paper, extra paper in this part of the exam for you to make notes on and plan. Also, if you're taking the digital version of the exam, you will also have access to extra note paper to plan. Use it to your advantage, but for the prepare and the organizing, both of these stages together, you have roughly 4, maybe 5 minutes to read through, underline, make notes, and prepare for what you're going to write itself. Now, as you're organizing, with this on the screen, this is not saying that you need to create something like this in the exam because you don't have time. This is just simply giving you a demonstration of organization. So for the essay, you will always start with an introduction and a conclusion. And then usually your two ideas will go between. Therefore, for this portion of the exam in part one, you should have 4 paragraphs roughly, is what they're looking for. And then from here, you take your notes and you actually go through and write the text itself. Now, a big advantage to the digital exam rather than the paper-based is in the digital exam, you're using a keyboard. Therefore, it's very easy to go back and edit things because it's just like you're using your personal computer or a tablet or something like this. Also, in the digital exam, there's a word count feature as well that automatically tells you how many words you've written. So, this is another huge advantage to doing the digital version of the exam. After you write, do not move on to part two. Take 5 minutes, go back and read and proofread and edit your text that you wrote. Roughly 5 minutes to plan, roughly 35 minutes to write, and then roughly 5 minutes at the end to go back and proofread. Some common mistakes that are made at the C2 level would be spelling. That is a big mistake that is made, and spelling is counted as incorrect, as a mistake. Also, confusing words like there, and there. Even though you know at the C2 level what these means, you're in a hurry and you may easily confuse one of the words that has the same sound. Collocations are another big thing. Make sure to remember any prepositions and the correct prepositions as well. Grammatical structures, also punctuation, the use of full stops, the use of commas. So at the C2 level, on the C2 proficiency exam, all punctuation is marked. Therefore, make sure that you use commas, full stops, exclamation points, question marks, whatever the sentence may be. And do be mindful of your language as well. Do not use contractions if it's a formal essay, for example. And lastly, repeated expressions. At the C2 level, you should be able to know, at the C2 level, you must have the knowledge to use synonyms rather than the same exact words or expressions repeated throughout the paper. Therefore, do keep that in mind. And as you're reading through correcting it, make sure that you're thinking about, okay, did I include everything that they've asked? Did I use the correct form for an essay? Do I have topic sentences? Is the conclusion fully developed? Did I use linking phrases and various components that tie the pieces of the writing together? And make sure to focus on the mistakes as well. I know that this is a lot to focus on at the end. However, that those 5 minutes are essential to doing well on this portion of the exam. Remember, you must have your answers to, well, your texts for both texts written on your answer sheet completely before the end of the exam. You will not be given extra time to transfer your answers for the writing portion. Keep in mind for writing part two that there are different types of writings. Therefore, do not only focus on a review because it may not be one of the three choices. If you don't know which one to choose, choose the one that you're the most comfortable with, is the biggest bit of advice that I gave my own learners in the past, preparing for the C2 Proficiency writing. A few other top tips. Do not write out a rough draft and then try to copy it. You will not have time. I'm a native speaker and I cannot do it for both texts in 90 minutes. Therefore, as you're writing, write it directly on the answer sheet itself. Also, do not worry about counting words. You know, for an essay, you need roughly 4 paragraphs. You know that each paragraph needs to be fully developed. And as such, each paragraph will be, like this and have maybe 4 to 5 sentences in it. Therefore, as long as you have 4 paragraphs that are fully developed, don't worry about your word count. Remember that for the writing paper, you must write in pen. Therefore, you will not be able to use a pencil in this portion of the exam. This is written in the instructions, and the person in the room that is administering the exam will verify that you are using a pen. Can it be erasable? No, it cannot. I will give you a link to a booklet that you can refer to that has different information about what is allowed and what isn't allowed in the exam itself. Make sure to write clearly as well. It doesn't matter what type of writing you write in, whether it's capitals, whether it's cursive, whether it's print. The important thing is that the examiner themselves need to be able to understand what you have written. Therefore, they need to be able to read your writing. If you have bad handwriting and it's difficult for people to understand what you're writing, consider doing the digital exam because it will be much, much easier where handwriting is not an issue. Also, remember that whilst part one, the upper limit is 280 words. For part two, it is slightly a longer text. So 280 to 320 words. So do keep in mind that the two parts of the C2 proficiency have different requirements on word count. Now, one other tool that you can help in preparing for the exam and use to train your writing is a tool that Cambridge has available free of charge. It's called Write and Improve. And what I would like for us to do, I will show you just a short video. Once again, just 1 minute. Let's watch the video and look at this special tool that Cambridge has developed to help you practice your writing.
Improve your English writing for free with Write and Improve. Join the millions of learners of English already using Write and Improve. Start writing. Choose from hundreds of tasks at all levels or create your own. No limits. Practice as much as you need and build your confidence. Get instant feedback and hints on where your writing needs improving. See your level for the writing task in seconds. Have fun and keep improving. Make changes and check again. Sign up. Save your work and see your progress in real time. Reliable results. Link to the international standard, the CEFR. Get the grade you want. Writing practice made easy with Write and Improve.
So we can see here the website is writeandimprove.com, and at the bottom of the screen I've included a QR code as well linking to this website. Basically what Write and Improve is an online tool that you can use that gives you exam type questions that times you and allows you to write digitally. And then afterwards, using AI, it gives you immediate feedback on the writing itself. It's a really good tool that you can use, and it's a free tool to begin to train your writing ability a bit more in preparation for the C2 exam. So, very quickly as well, I'm seeing several questions pop up in the chat. Make sure that those get put in the Q&A, and I'll look at those at the end of the session. Moving right along, the third paper is the listening paper. So there are four parts to the listening paper. Let me hear from you in the chat. Which of these parts do you tend to find most challenging? Okay, a few part twos, a lot of part fours. Several people have even written four with several exclamation points after it. A few threes, a few twos. Yeah, typically for the C2 proficiency exam, part four is the part that most candidates find quite challenging. So in part four, the reason that it's challenging is you will hear five extracts or five speakers speaking about the same subject. But while you listen to each of them speak, you're asked to do two different tasks at the same time. So here, matching A through H with the speakers one through five, and here, A through H, matching with speakers one through five. So, how do we do this portion of the exam? Keep in mind, before the listening part four, the speakers actually start speaking, the recording will come on. It will explain the instructions for part four, and then it will give you approximately 45 seconds in silence to look at the questions before the listening starts. Therefore, during these 45 seconds, read with your pen, underline keywords, key phrases. It's very, very important and essential in part four. Remember, though, that there are two questions that you're answering for each speaker, which makes this part a bit tricky. So, for the paper based exam, where do you write your answers initially? Where do you write your answers for the listening paper? Okay, answer sheet, test, the booklet. So it will say this in the instructions, but please, please, please pay attention to this. This is very important. For all four parts of the listening exam, as you're listening and doing the exam, you will write your answers on the test paper itself, not on the answer sheet. All four parts, you write your answers directly on the test. And then at the very end of the exam, of the listening portion of the exam, they give you an extra 5 minutes to transfer your answers from the test to the answer sheet. This is the only part of the exam in all four of the papers where you do not write your answers on the answer sheet. And this is the only part of the four parts where they give you extra time at the end to write your answers and transfer them onto the answer sheet. For the reading and use of English and the writing papers, you need to write your answers directly on the answer sheet because at the end of the 90 minutes for each of those, they will not give you any extra time. However, for the listening paper, they will give you the extra 5 minutes at the end to transfer your answers. So for part four, there are a couple of different approaches that you can take to doing this. So approach one would be, first of all, you read the options in the 45 seconds, you underline the keywords, try to, as you're doing it, to think of various synonyms that you may hear. And then When the speaker starts speaking, you're only focusing on task one. You're forgetting about task two. The first time that you hear the recording, you're only doing task one. And then the second time that you hear the recording, you're doing task two. So here, an advantage to this approach would be you're only focusing on one portion at a time rather than both of them at the same time. However, a disadvantage to approach one is that you do not have time at the end where you're listening to the recording again in order to check your answers. So with this, there's positives and there's negatives to this approach. Approach two, as you can probably guess, would be during the 45 seconds, read the options, underline the keywords, think of synonyms, and then the first time that you hear the recording, you do everything at one time. So you try to find the answer for task one and task two during the first recording that you hear. That way, when you hear the recording again a second time, you're able to listen and check the answers. A positive to this approach would be you check your answers at the end and you can catch any mistakes because there will be distractors that are used, things to try to that make you think one thing is the answer whenever actually this is the answer. A disadvantage to this approach is that you're doing two things at one time, and not everyone can cope with this. Now, a common question that I get at this point in the Top Tips webinar is, Charles, which approach is best? Which one do you recommend? What I would recommend you doing is taking a practice exam, well, taking two practice exams, doing part four using approach one with one of the exams, and then doing the second exam, doing approach two with it, just simply to see which one is easiest for you. For me personally, if I were doing the exam, I know that I cannot cope with having to do two things at the same time. Therefore, I would probably do approach one if it were me. However, I have friends that have taken the exam and have used approach two and they find it brilliant. So the biggest bit of advice here is try it both ways, find what approach works best for you, and then use that approach every other time that you take the exam. A few tips for the overall listening paper. Make sure that you listen to the instructions, and as you're hearing the instructions, read them on the test paper as well. It's important that you understand exactly what you're supposed to do. Once again, you will be nervous in taking the exams. Therefore, make sure that you have a clear understanding of what is expected. Also, use the information on the page, the answers to help you follow the recording. Now, not every recording will it go in order for the C2 proficiency. However, occasionally you can use the information on the test paper to help you follow the recording. Guess if you don't know the answer. Never leave anything blank. Even if you're not sure, guess. As you're listening and you're not sure, put a question mark. As you're listening and you think it's A or C on the test paper, write AC question mark. And then as you're transferring your answers, guess if you still do not know. For this portion of the exam, you will be expected to use a pencil and not a pen. Make sure that if you change an answer that you have already written on the answer sheet, make sure that you erase it or rub it out completely. Because if it's not clear, even if one of them is the correct answer, it will be counted wrong. Therefore, make sure to completely rub out any answers that you want to change. Also, don't spend too much time on any one question. If I'm concentrating on this and panicking, I don't know the answer to this, I don't know the answer, and I'm thinking about it, the recording is still going on. And therefore, you may miss the next couple of questions because you're too focused on one. Therefore, spend a few seconds. If you don't know it, skip it, go on to the next one. Listen again for it the second time that you hear the recording. If you still don't know, make a guess. And lastly, do not rush to write an answer for parts one, three, and four. Just because you hear one word or phrase, make sure that you concentrate on the overall meaning and the context. Because as I said, there may be distractors that are there that may lead you to initially say A is the answer. However, if I listen to the recording completely, it becomes obvious later that C is the answer. Therefore, do not be in a hurry to write something just because you hear one word or phrase. Lastly, the speaking paper. So for the speaking paper, we know that there are three parts, parts one, two, and three. In the chat, which of these portions, part one, two, or three, do you find the most challenging? Okay, it's overwhelming right now with everything in the chat. It is part two. Absolutely. Typically, with part two, because there are a couple of different aspects to this task in part two, it can be a bit tricky. Also, candidates find part three from time to time quite challenging as well. Now, just as in the writing paper, the speaking paper also has criteria. There are 5 different areas that you're marked on. Grammatical resource. So once again, C2 grammar correct, C1 grammar correct, B2, B1, A2, A1. And the same thing with lexical resource as well. Lexical resource focuses on vocabulary. Are you using correctly C2 words, C1, B2, B1, A2, and A1? Discourse management looks at how well your conversation flows. It looks at are you connecting things that you say now to what you said before or to what your partner said before, making it a complete and logical train of thought that you are communicating. For pronunciation, let me ask you this. Is it okay if you have an accent? Will they mark you down if you have an accent? Okay, I see yeses and I see nos. So for pronunciation, they are not marking you down if you have an accent. It's understandable that even if you are fluent in English, that you could possibly have an accent. But what they look at is, okay, he or she has an accent, so can I still understand them irregardless of the accent? If you're still understandable, you do not have to worry about it. If you do have problems with your accent affecting the understanding of the listener, this is when it can be a bit more problematic. And also for the C2 level, they do look at things like intonation, sentence stress for emphasis, things like this. And then lastly, interactive communication is how well you are interacting with your partner. Now, even if your partner has a better or worse level of English than you have, it doesn't matter. What they're looking for this particular aspect is how well you're managing the dialogue and the conversation between you and your partner. Are you asking your partner questions? Are you asking them what you think? Are you throwing in little things? Oh, that's a very, very interesting thought. Little tidbits like this go a long way to helping candidates do better with interactive communication. So if we look at part two, one of the more problematic parts, in the first part of part two, you will see this. The interlocutor or the examiner at the table with you will say, now, in this part of the test, you're going to do something together. Here are some pictures of people in different situations. First, I'd like you to look at the pictures and talk together about how common these situations are in your country. You have about a minute for this, so don't worry if I interrupt you. And then you are expected to speak for 1 minute with your partner, maintaining a dialogue about the pictures that you see. And then in the second part of this portion, after a minute that you've discussed the pictures, the examiner will say thank you. Anytime that the examiner says thank you, it's your cue to stop talking. And the time is up and it's time to move on to the next portion of the exam. So the interlocutor will say thank you. Now, look at all the pictures. I'd like you to imagine that a television documentary is being produced on working in the food industry. These pictures show some of the issues that are being considered. Talk together about the different issues related to working in the food industry that these pictures show. Then decide which issue might stimulate most interest. You have about 3 minutes to do this, and you are expected to talk about this. Make sure, especially in part two, that you're listening to what the interlocutor or the examiner is saying and that you're following the instructions. It's okay if you're not sure what the pictures are. It's okay if you speculate on the content as well. Raise the level of the conversation above just the everyday, purely descriptive. So, for example, in this picture, I see a man. The man is holding a comb and standing in front of the mirror. Perhaps he's in his house. This is good, but this indicates a B1, B2 level of English. You're C2, therefore you need to raise the overall level of the conversation in this portion in discussing the pictures. Also, keep the task question that you're answering in mind as you're speaking with your partner. Remember, it may be up to you to navigate and pull the conversation along to be able to completely answer the questions that you are being asked. A common question that's asked for the speaking portion, the speaking paper of the C2 Proficiency exam is, Charles, why are there two speaking examiners? So with this, there are two speaking examiners in the room with you. It will be yourself and a partner. Both of you are taking the test, and you will be sitting at a table with one of the examiners that's called an interlocutor. Their job is to talk to you and ask you the questions to answer. They're also in charge of keeping time as well. They're the ones that will speak and actually administer the exam itself. The other examiner that will be sitting in the corner at a table separate from yours is called the assessor. This person will not speak. This person will simply sit at the table, and as you're talking, they will be making notes. Forget about this person, forget that they exist. Focus on either the person in front of you, the interlocutor, or if you are in part two speaking to your partner, focus on only your partner. Forget about the assessor. They're there to score you in the four criteria or in the five criteria: the grammatical resource, lexical resource, discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. Some other tips that I can give you for the speaking paper itself: make sure to listen to what both the examiner, the interlocutor says, but also to what your partner is saying as well. On the C2 exam, you must respond to what your partner says and include some of what they say. Well, as you said, this is actually the case. Or, well, you said da 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 da. Whereas I see it from a slightly different perspective. I see it as da 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 da. Therefore, make sure that you're always listening to what your partner says to be able to respond to it. And be prepared to ask them questions. It's key to doing well in the speaking paper. Well, what do you think? Well, what do you think that this picture is? Once again, don't worry if your partner is better at speaking English than you or worse at speaking English than you. The examiners mark you individually. Your partner and their level of English has nothing to do with your actual score that you're getting. In part one, especially, try to answer the questions with just more than one word. So if the question is, okay, Charles, where do you live? Prague. No, 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 no. Charles, where do you live? I live in Prague. I actually live in the 10th district of Prague, near a place called Vršovice. So make sure that you are extending your answers a bit, more than just one word. Remember, you need to give them enough of your English. You need to demonstrate it so that they can accurately assess it. So always make it a habit to answer with just more than one word or phrase. Always try your best to make the use of time effective. Make sure that you have enough time to show off your English skills, your English ability. This is what you're being assessed on. But do not interrupt your partner unless it is absolutely necessary. If your partner is talking a lot and not giving you a chance to speak, the examiner, the interlocutor is trained to step in and pause the conversation and direct a question towards you. That way, you will also get an opportunity to speak. Try to manage the conversation. Try to say, well, may I comment on this or something like this. However, never outright interrupt what your partner is saying. It's important to let them finish. And lastly, make sure that you're speaking clearly so that both of the examiners can hear you, both the one at the table and the one at the opposite table to you as well, both the interlocutor and the assessor. So, with that last bit of tips, we have gone through all four of the papers of the C2 Proficiency exam. Now, I would like for us to focus a little bit briefly on studying for the exam. So, between now and exam day, there's some tips that I can give you. There are three tips, and each of the tips are represented by one picture. So, the phone, what do you think that this tip will be involving a phone? Let me hear from you in the chat. Okay, perhaps AI using digital apps, online tests, podcasts, less screen time. Okay, what about the dictionary? What tip do you think that this will be? Learn new words, good advice. Picking up new words, word expressions, using the dictionary. Okay, and what do you think that this picture represents? Audiobooks, good guess. Reading and listening in English, podcasts, oral material. Okay, so the first image is the mobile phone. Now, I know that in 2026 there are some wonderful apps that you can use. However, if you are not using one of the apps to study for the exam and you're actually looking at material, leave your phone out of the picture. Put it in a different room, put it in a bag, put it in a drawer. Studies have shown that if you have your mobile phone sitting next to you as you're doing a task, there's going to be a lot of temptation to pick it up to check social media, to check and see if your friend has responded to your earlier message. Therefore, avoid this temptation. And if you're not using one of the mobile apps, put it away. Secondly, involving dictionaries. Remember, vocabulary learning takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice again and again and again for you to be able to truly know and use the words. Therefore, try every day between now and the day that you take the exam to review certain words, certain collocations, certain phrases, phrasal verbs, things like this. But make sure that you're doing it every day between now and the time that you take the exam. And lastly, the picture of the headphones and the books. Try to listen to as many things as you can in English. Podcasts, TV shows, radio reports, whatever it may be, vloggers, YouTube videos, shorts, things like this. The more that you listen to things in English, the better your listening skills become. Likewise, with reading, try to read as much as you can in English as well. It doesn't have to be a novel. It doesn't have to be anything formal. It could be you like films, read a film magazine. Go online and read some articles online in English. Try to read the news if you like current events. Find whatever it is that you like to read and read it, but make sure that it's in English as well. Once again, just like listening to various things in English, reading various things in English as well helps build our reading skills, but also helps us with perhaps new language that we may not have seen before. And it helps us to review the language that we already know. Someone wrote in the chat, how about films? Absolutely. Watch as many films as you can in English. This is another very good way to practice your listening skills. However, let me encourage you at the C2 level, turn the subtitles off. Just actually listen to the film in English. If the subtitles are on, you're going to focus on reading the subtitles. And that's practicing our reading skill, not our listening skill. So watching films is great, watching TV shows is great in English. However, leave the subtitles off, even English subtitles, leave them off to truly practice to the full extent your listening skills. Yeah, there's a lot of questions in the chat about different types of books. Read them. It doesn't matter if it's manga, if it's comics, whatever it is, read in English as much as you can. Now, the last bit of tips that we will close the webinar with are top tips for exam day itself. So what should you expect on exam day? My first bit of advice that I will give you, even if you're not in the habit of eating breakfast, eat breakfast. Have a good breakfast. It's okay to bring along food as well with you to the exam center that you will have access to during the breaks if the food is in a clear plastic bag. It's important that you eat breakfast because you will need a lot of energy to get through the exam day. And even if it's mental energy, it's still exhausting by the time you get to the end of all four papers. Therefore, start the day well with breakfast. And also, as you are taking the exam, if there's something that you do not understand as far as the instructions or what you are supposed to do, ask. Just simply raise your hand. The person in the room giving the exam will come back to you and you are able to ask your question. Now, they will not tell you if something is right or wrong. They will not tell you what the meaning of a word is. They're there to ensure that you understand exactly what you are supposed to be doing for the exam. Therefore, if you do not understand something, ask. You will never be penalized. Also, the temptation is definitely there the day before the exam, the night before the exam, to really cram as much as you can and study as hard as you can the night before. Don't do it. By exam day, you know what you know. What you don't know, you don't know. Staying up and studying late the night before will have the opposite effect that you want it to on your exam. You'll go in exhausted. And if you're exhausted, you're not performing at your best. Therefore, try your best to go to sleep early. Put your phone up and don't have screen time laying in the bed the night before the exam. Actually sleep. It's one of the most important things that you can do the night before the exam itself. And lastly, in order to warm up as you're going into the English exam, as you are going and arriving and checking in and showing your ID and things like this, speak English. Go ahead and use this as a warm up and practice for getting your brain into English mode. So all four of these things are tips that I can give you. However, Cambridge also has a part of a website dedicated exactly to what to expect on exam day. So the link is here via the QR code. And if you go here, you will be able to read through the different rules that they have for taking exams, what is allowed, what's not allowed, what are some tips for exam day, what happens on exam day. A lot of your questions will be answered here. Someone is writing in the chat many times the same question. What is the average age of the examiners? There's not an average age. They are trained professionals by Cambridge that are adults, and they are fluent in English. Even though they may not be a native speaker, they still have to go through certain quality control tests. So just trust that the examiners that are examining you in the speaking section, in the speaking paper of the exam, have been trained and are qualified to assess English exams. So in the workshop today, we've covered quite a bit. We've looked at the overall format and structure of the exam, thought a little bit about why it's important before then looking at each paper and looking at the more challenging or problematic aspects of each of the papers. Before then, looking at some tips for what to expect on exam day and how to study for the exam. So now, let me leave you with a few resources before I go to the Q&A box and try to answer some questions. So, Cambridge has a booklet that is available free of charge called Information for Candidates. And if you scan the QR code here, you're able to download a free PDF copy of the book itself. A lot of useful information is here, a lot of tips, suggestions for studying, things like that can be found in this booklet. So it's a really good booklet to read through in order to make sure that you fully understand the exam before you actually take it. Likewise, we watched the video, but do have a look at Write and Improve. It's an excellent way for you to be able to train your writing skills a little bit more and make sure that you're getting everything that you need to included in your pieces of writing in hopes that when you take the exam, you'll do better on the writing section. So do have a look at this free resource from Cambridge. And lastly, there are a wealth of resources and information that Cambridge has on their website here, resources for teachers and learners. If you click on the learner section, there's a lot of extra materials that are available free of charge to help you in studying and preparing to take the C2 Proficiency exam. So, with that being said, let me go to the Q&A box. So, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. I will go through as many as I can and answer as many as I can in within the next 10 minutes or so that we have left in the session. So, do spelling mistakes count in the listening section? Spelling mistakes count in every section of the exam. Spelling mistakes will always result in an actual mistake. In writing, do students need to indent each paragraph or leave one line? It's a good rule to get yourself into the habit of. It's a very good habit to have. It's not required. However, skipping a line is usually the recommendation that I would give to my students when I taught in the classroom. Just simply leave a line between them. It helps the overall appearance of the essay to stay a bit tidier. In use of English, reading use of English part 4, do we lose all marks if each part is partially right? Yes, you do. So for each answer, they break it into two. Each portion of that must be exactly right in order for you to get the 1 point for each part. If I'm taking the digital exam, can I ask for a piece of paper to make essay notes? Absolutely. You will be provided with that. And if you need more, just simply raise your hand. They'll come and you can ask for more. Um, what happens in the case that the post loses your exams? It's sent. The paper-based exams are sent under specific conditions where they will not be lost. Therefore, this will not happen. Cambridge has taken many precautions in this, so it's not sent through regular post. It's sent through a specialized post that ensures the reception at Cambridge. How many points do we lose with spelling mistakes in the reading use of English? I mean, for example, in part 1, where you're asked to write the missing word, or I'm sorry, in part 2, where you're asked to write the missing word, if you misspell the word, you do not get a point for it. So any mistakes that you get will be considered as incorrect, even if it is the right word. It must always be spelled correctly. Um, Let's see. What is the appropriate word limit I can go under? I would say try your best to stick to what they request. Um, Under is always worse than over, but over you risk mistakes and repetition and which can negatively affect your score as well. Um, let's see. Can I get any tips for parts 5 and 7? Yeah, if you refer to the website that I gave you, the Cambridge website, and specifically the booklets, the information for candidates, there are tips for every part of each of the papers for the exam itself. Um, let's see, already answered that one. For us students that have dyslexia, do the spelling mistakes count? So if you have a neurodivergency like dyslexia or a speech impediment or dyspraxia, ADHD, and it has been diagnosed by a doctor, when you register for the exam, first of all, register as soon as you can. And then when you register, make sure that you inform them of this. And they will ask for the documents from your doctor. And based on the paper from your doctor, Cambridge can possibly give you extra allowances. Whilst correct, like spelling mistakes, that is not one of the allowances. I'm afraid that spelling still counts with dyslexia. But there are other allowances that they will give diagnosed people who have a diagnosed neurodivergence. So do ask your exam center for details on this. Make sure that you also have documentation from your doctor to provide to the exam center. May I ask, please, is the lavatory permitted use during the exam? No. During the exam itself, you will not be able to use the restroom or the lavatory. However, keep in mind that between each paper, there is a break. So, for example, the first portion of the exam will usually be the reading and use of English. You know that you need to go to the toilet before You have 90 minutes and then you can go after. But actually leaving the exam room itself, if you leave the exam room, you are not allowed to re-enter during the exam itself. Where can we leave our stuff when we enter the room? So when you arrive at the exam center, you will provide your ID and they will give you instruction on the area that you will leave your things. There will be a designated area where you will leave your bags and things like this. So do refer to your exam center for details on this. How exactly will using both American and British English be reflected in our exam results? I mean, this would be in the lexical resource or the vocabulary aspect of the exams itself, that it would be reflected in that. You should know that in using the range of vocabulary, you should be able to correctly identify and differentiate between American and British English, and at the C2 level, stay consistent throughout. So this particularly comes into play on the writing and in the speaking portion of the papers itself. So we have time for two more questions. Um, let's see. Are phrasal verbs considered informal? Hmm. This is a loaded question. The easiest answer here is yes. There are a few exceptions. However, just make it easy on yourself and consider any phrasal verb to be informal, therefore avoiding use in formal writing. If the words in the essay are 10% more, is there any problem? I mean, no, there's not, but just keep in mind the more you write, the more likely you are to make mistakes and repeat yourself, which can have a negative effect on your score. And one more. In this speaking session, will our partner be of a similar age, or is there a chance it will be much older or much younger than us? I mean, the minimum age to take the Cambridge English qualifications is around 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, like somewhere through this. Therefore, that could be the youngest. And I mean, in theory, you could be put into an exam with someone much older. They will try to match you up a bit better than that, I would say, in the exam center itself, but there may not always be the possibility to. So, is there a chance that it could happen? Yes, there is. However, it should be viewed as more unlikely than anything. So, with that being said, I've tried to answer as many of the questions that I could at the time in the time that we have. Any other questions that you have, do refer to the Cambridge websites that I gave you, and the majority of the time, the answer will be there if you do a bit of digging and research. So, with that being said, thank you very much for coming to the session today. Thank you again for your participation and your engagement. And I wish you all the luck in the world in taking the exam and just continue to study, continue on the path that you're on, and I'm sure that you'll do fine on the exam. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a good rest of the day wherever you are. Goodbye.